As the allegations against Halliburton and its former subsidiary, KBR, Kellogg Brown Root, continue to grow, we turn to the award-winning investigative journalist Pratap Chatterjee, who's traced their record in Iraq for years. His latest book releases today. It's called Halliburtons Army: How a Well-Connected Texas Oil Company Revolutionized the Way America Makes War. Pratap Chatterjee joins us now in our Firehouse studio. Welcome to Democracy Now!
Thank you for having me on, Amy.
It's good to have you with us. As the U.S. government says that the troops will draw down over the next year, year and a half in Iraq, what's happening with Halliburton and, as you call it, Halliburton's Army?
Well, the U.S. military is completely dependent on Halliburton, despite all the news that you read of, soldiers, being electrocuted, drivers being shot. The company continues to get contracts, and it's because half the people in Iraq are contractors, and a large number of them are KBR employees. They're South Asian workers, they're Indians, Pakistanis, they're Southeast Asian, Filipinos. They are Halliburton's Army, and they make this military tick. They make this army, allow this army to march forward on its stomach, is because they feed that stomach. So you had Peter Singer on last week talking about the jobs that are dirty, dull, or dangerous, and and now they use robots to kill from the sky. Well, they still need to launch those robots, those drones, and they need to have people in place to feed them, and that's what the Indians.
Let's go to P.W. Singer for a minute. We'll play a clip of our interview. He wrote the book Wired for War about the robotics revolution in this country.
Now, the problem is what are the implications of that for our democracy? So, for example, if you are sending less and less Americans into harm's way, does it make you more cavalier about the use of force? And one of the people that was fascinating they interviewed was a former Assistant Secretary of Defense for Ronald Reagan, who actually had this to say about these systems. He worried that they would create more marketization of war. As he put it, we might have more shock and awe talk to defray discussion of the true costs of war. My grandfather served in the Pacific Fleet in World War II. When he went to war, he went to a place where danger took place, and the family didn't know if he was ever coming back. And that's very different than the experience of, for example, a Predator drone pilot that I met with for it, who described that basically his experience of fighting in the Iraq War was getting in his Toyota Corolla, driving to work. He's doing this in Nevada. Driving into work for 12 hours, he puts missiles on targets, then gets back in the Toyota, commutes back home, and within 20 minutes, he's talking to his son at the dinner table.
That's P.W. Singer, Wired for War. Pratap Chatterjee. The title of your book is Halliburton's Army, the subtitle, How a Well-Connected Texas Oil Company Revolutionized the Way America Makes War. Very quickly, the history. How did this happen?
Well, this actually goes back many years. Most people think, well, Halliburton was brought in by Dick Cheney. Not true at all. Kellogg Brown and Root, or Brown and Root at the time, was building warships during the Second World War. In Vietnam, they built almost all the bases there. You can go to Cam Ranh Bay in Southeast Asia. And I talk about Donald Rumsfeld actually arriving in 1966. He visits the bases, and then he comes back to the U.S. Congress, and he speaks in the House of the House of Representatives, and he says, this company, they don't have receipts, they are wasting money, and they're paying off the president.
They're paying
off the president.
Lyndon
in this case, Lyndon B. Johnson. So fast forward 37 years, and he is the man who's giving them a contract. And actually, it's Rumsfeld, really. It's not even Cheney. It's Rumsfeld who's looking to the system of outsourcing war, of finding Indians to clean toilets and that sort of thing, so that Americans, can invade Iraq.
But it's Cheney who is head of Halliburton.
Cheney was the head of Halliburton from 1995 to 2000, and he made out well. He was actually a very bad CEO in some ways and a very good CEO in other ways. I mean, he took the company from making $100 million in U.S. contracts to $2.3 billion in the 5 years he was there. So a large increase. For the company, in fact, he made some very bad business decisions. He bought up a company that had $1 billion in asbestos liability. People often ask me, did Cheney get the contract? Did he give the contract to Halliburton? I really think the question should be reversed. Why did Halliburton hire Cheney, as opposed to why did Cheney hire Halliburton? Well, Halliburton hired Cheney because of the revolving door, because they knew he could bring business to them. And once he actually became vice president, Halliburton's lobbying budget actually dropped by half. They stopped having to, having to lobby because they already knew they were in. They had these contracts set up from so many years ago. I mean, starting in Vietnam, building Diego Garcia. I talk about them in Turkey and Adana. Operation Northern Watch. Was supported by people working for a consortium called VBR, which is partly Brown and Root Halliburton. So this has gone on for a long time. In Bosnia, in Kosovo, under Clinton, Kellogg Brown and Root, then just Brown and Root, subsidiary of Halliburton, was, cooking for the soldiers, building Camp Steel in Kosovo, and today that continues. So this is not something that's new. It is, in fact, par for the course that Cheney would come in and work for them.
Pratap Chatterjee, we are seeing a huge discussion right now on this global economic meltdown and dealing with what is the solution to it, but rarely in the concerns about the amount of taxpayer money that's going out, or is there a discussion about U.S. taxpayer money going to corporations like Halliburton?
Well, $25 billion in the last 5 years has gone to Halliburton, now Kellogg Brown and Root, their subsidiary, in Iraq to be able to build the bases for American soldiers and to do this war. They get a guaranteed profit. These contracts are cost plus. So whatever Halliburton or now Kellogg Brown and Root do in Iraq, they are going to get 2%. In Bosnia it was 7%, 9%. Doesn't matter how much they charge, they are guaranteed how much is spent, they guarantee get a profit. They never make a loss. And so for them, this is, it's gravy in some ways, because whether Obama withdraws from Iraq or continues there, they're going to get the contract to supply the military.
I mean, I asked Obama at Cooper Union when he was running for office, so he's going to support a ban on the military contractors, but he said no.
No, his point is, I will make them more accountable. I mean, in the legislation he's promoted, he has never said that he's going to withdraw the contractors. And in a sense, this is actually quite important, making them accountable, because this has not happened. I mean, the Iraq War is just, there's so much waste, so much incompetence there. And
Afghanistan?
In Afghanistan, it's exactly the same thing. I was just there in November for 3 weeks, and you have the same thing. You have, troops who sit behind tanks, living on bases like Bagram, where you have, once again, workers from KBR who supply them with food and clean the toilets and that sort of thing. And nobody's watching them, partly because when I was in Kuwait, I asked one of the commanders, I said, I can prove to you that this particular subcontract by this company, PwC, was awarded, should never have been awarded because they lied on the paperwork. The drivers they hired from Fiji didn't know how to drive these big reefers. Why are they here? He said, it doesn't matter to me. It matters to me now that the soldiers are being fed. I said, will you question this contract? Will you question? He says, no, not at all. Because in order for me to send my troops into battle, I need to feed them and I need to, make sure that they're taken care of. And KBR provides that service.
Pratap Chatterjee, we just have 2 minutes, and I want to go to that top story, reading the introduction, how it was just awarded KBR $35 million for electrical work, despite the fact that it's under criminal investigation for the deaths of at least 2 Americans. And separately, the U.S. government has just charged KBR with criminal bribery charges for promising and paying tens of millions of dollars to Nigerian officials in exchange for lucrative contracts. Explain both of those.
Well, the contract in Nigeria, which was a contract with a consortium called TSKJ, Albert Jack Stanley, who is the head of KBR at the time, worked for Cheney, paid tens of millions of dollars to Nigerian officials. So they're paying a $500 million fine to the U.S. government for what happened at those times. So this is a huge, this should be a much bigger story.
This is money that comes from taxpayers, U.S. taxpayers. So U.S. taxpayers are bribing Nigerian officials, or they're doing it in our name.
That is exactly how.
And the Americans?
So now, when KBR works in a place like Iraq, they are able to get away with a lot of shoddy work. And my book covers the fact that a lot of the work that was done, because people weren't watching, there wasn't oversight, there wasn't accountability, they were able to get away with, shoddy electrical work, often bad food, overpriced items. A lot of times there's also a lot of detail of how, people walked away with, the book opens with this guy, Jeff Alex Mazan, walking away with $1 million check. And he's paid that by a subcontractor to Halliburton. When the case came up at the Rock Island Arsenal, he said, look, he says, what's wrong with this, getting this money? This is money that is owed to me because I did this work for Halliburton.
The 2 Americans who died, we have 20 seconds.
Well, the Americans who died, Donald Humphrey was killed by the U.S. Army when he was driving a truck. It's extremely dangerous for the contractors who live there because, they are effectively fighting in somebody else's war, and they don't wear a uniform. So when they go to work for Halliburton, many truck drivers have been killed because they are actually civilians in a war zone fighting a war, where people, uniforms, don't count for anything.
Pratap Chatterjee's book is Halliburton's Army, How a Well-Connected Texas Oil Company Revolutionized the Way America Makes War.